Reading is one of the most powerful things you can do to improve your ability in any language. So many studies point to how essential it is in learning a language. And when I interviewed one of the most published academics, he said it's something that you can't avoid. So if you're not using reading in your language learning, you might be missing out on something that could be the key to your success. Not only that, but it can actually help you with your speaking too, but we'll get to that later. So if you want to try and use reading to improve your language skills, or perhaps you're already a bookworm, you just want to pick up a new language at the same time, then either way, you're in the right place. So in this video, I'll show you this simple 3-step system, how you can put it into practice, and how it will help you get better in any language that you're trying to learn. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Matt and I'm learning Spanish and Mandarin. One of the key parts to my success so far, without a doubt, has been reading. On this channel, I share straightforward tips on how to learn a language in a way that works for you. Now, before we get into how to make the most out of your reading to skyrocket your language skills higher than a kangaroo on a trampoline, I wanted to let you know that Story Learning's Black Friday sale is now on and there are some huge discounts. They've got courses in 15 different languages and this is the best time of year to pick them up. If you haven't heard of Story Learning, their courses are based around the idea of reading a story and picking up a new language at the same time. If you were thinking of maybe dipping your toe in a new language or taking it to the next level at some point, then now's the time to get the courses whilst they have this massive discount. So I'll leave the link in the description if you're interested. So when it comes to reading, it's pretty much the Swiss Army knife of language learning. There are new words, grammar in context, cultural information. There might even be an enjoyable story in there if you're lucky too. Part of why reading is so great is that compared to a conversation where there might be more mental gymnastics going on to understand everything and then work out what you're going to say, when you're reading, you can just slow it down and take it at your own pace, rereading a section if you need to. And so because it's so rich in all of these different things for your brain to choose from, you can internalize a lot of this stuff naturally without always needing to be told it deliberately. So there are studies going back to at least the 80s showing that through reading, you'll pick up new words in context. There is some important nuance there though, so hold that thought and we'll come back to it later. But more than just picking up new words from reading them in context, there are studies showing that your overall ability in a language improves just through reading. And of course, the knock-on effect is that the more you improve, the more material is available for you because now you can just understand more stuff. So it's sort of like this progress flywheel that keeps you improving. Not only that, but as your vocabulary and grammar naturally improve just through reading, you'll find conversations easier too. So that's not bad for just relaxing with a book and a cuppa. So let's get into the first part of this system that you need to think about. Imagine you're starting to learn Russian and on day one, you're forced to read War and Peace by Tolstoy in Russian with a paper dictionary. That is one hell of a rough start for any language learner. So the first start in this simple system is making sure that you select the right material. I know that sounds simple, but it's important that you get it right. There are two main things to consider here, but on top of that, it also depends on your personal preferences as well as what's available. So the first thing to consider is what's the material about? Is it dialogues from a beginner's textbook? Are you reading news articles, Wikipedia, blogs made for speakers of that language? Whatever it is, you need to find it appealing in some way. Obviously, the less experienced you are, the simpler the resource needs to be. But it might simply be getting through it and ticking it off appeals to you, or even just enjoying the novelty of reading in a new language for the first time. That could be enough for now. If you're a bit more advanced, read something that genuinely interests you, a book in a genre you like, or even Reddit threads about whatever random hobbies you've got. Non-fiction will always be easier than fiction, which is worth bearing in mind if you're looking for more advanced stuff. But whatever you select, how much you understand will be a real factor. You don't have to understand every word, and in fact, if you do, it's way too easy for you. But at the same time, if you're staring at a page of dense text and you're not sure what's going on, then it's probably not right for you. Just find something else for now. And how comfortable you are with the difficulty level of something that is very personal. It can even vary throughout the day as your energy levels change. The second thing to consider is how is the text presented? Is it a paper book? Is it electronic? Have you got a printout? This will have big implications for the next stage of this process. Also, if it's electronic, have you got anything you can read it on that is bigger than your phone screen? And by the way, if you would find it easier to have this whole process written down, I've created a PDF download for this video, which you can find a link for in the description. So before we get into the final stage, which you can use to get the most out of every resource, we need to look at step number 2 first. So you've selected your reading material, but there is a gap which you need to bridge in order to make progress. You need to be able to go from seeing the new words to actually understanding them. Imagine you're walking along a busy street and you see a billboard in English. Your brain is going to automatically process it, so you understand it without thinking about what that combination of letters means. We just have to get you to a point where it does the same in your target language. So there are a number of ways to do this, and it's really worth considering your different options in order to find something that works for you. And like all of these things, what you can do can change over time too. It's nice to try new stuff, and in fact I've changed how I've approached this over time and it's really helping me too. But more on that in a second. So what I've done before is the most obvious, but let me unpack it a bit because this is where the nuance I mentioned earlier comes in. So previously I've just kept reading without looking up words. If you find something at the right level, you can often guess the meaning of words from the context alone, or sometimes there are words that just aren't as important to follow a story. If you're getting the gist, you can keep reading immersed in what's happening to the characters without worrying about the exact description of clothing they're wearing, for example. In an ideal world, this is all I would do. This is where graded readers come in. Now, I've got a ton of these and they will massively boost your language skills. You can listen to the audio for them, if you can find it, to improve your listening skills, to cement what you've read. You should be able to find them at various levels too, so you can get something that isn't too far outside of what you can understand. These days, you can also use AI to create graded material for you. Simply ask it to make material on any subject at a level of your choice, and you've got fantastic learning material right there. Something that you can also do is simply read books or stories that you already know in English. So depending on your level, these might have to be graded reader versions, or perhaps you're ready to get into some more difficult material. Mandarin Companion, for example, have graded readers inspired by some old classics. And when I listened to the audiobooks for Dune and Lord of the Rings in Spanish, knowing the story already helped me for those times where I needed to guess the meanings of words. Fun fact for you, Bilbo Baggins is actually Bilbo Bolsón in Spanish. There is a slight issue with an approach where we just keep reading though. So it's not the end of the world, but it is worth bearing in mind, and you can still use graded readers. In fact, this is the problem that they're kind of designed to solve. So Paul Nation is a researcher in how we learn languages, and he suggested that to accurately guess the meanings of new words we see, we already need to know about 95% of the words on the page. That is a lot. Now, you can often have a go at guessing the meanings, but we might not have enough information to accurately work out what they are. If you're only just following along with a story, you're not necessarily going to have enough context for when you see a new word that you've not seen before. You're also not going to have as much attention to notice what's happening with the grammar if you're only just following along with what's happened to the main character. So ideally, try and have a high level of comprehension with what you're reading. One option here is just to keep what you're reading relatively comfortable for you. So that way you can just let your brain work things out over time. This is generally what's called extensive reading. But what if you want to try stuff that's more difficult right now? Stuff where you don't know as many words. So that's where translation comes in. Now, previously, I've tried to avoid translating too much. Some words just don't translate directly between languages. I always found the word animal in Spanish weird. Sometimes it's like a form of encouragement, talking about energy, like energy, come on. Or like in Chinese, to encourage someone, you tell them 加油, which literally means add oil. So translations aren't perfect, but they are a tool that we can use to shortcut some of the learning process. And I think these days it kind of makes sense to take advantage of them. But my focus is on using them as a crutch to understand the words in the target language so I can bridge that understanding gap. Once I understand the words, I don't need the English translations, and so I can just reinforce it with step 3, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, so this isn't going to be a long list, but I want to give you your options here. It's not going to take forever to go through. I could go into way more detail, but if you want some more details, drop it into the comments below. I can always do another video in the future. Essentially, here are your options if you want to go through the translation route. So, bilingual books. They're basically graded readers, but where you have the text in English on one side so that you can make sense of the words you don't understand in your target language. You often can't get loads of these that are that high quality, but they exist and they can give you that leg up to understand stuff that you would otherwise struggle to read on paper. They save you to having to reach for a dictionary every 5 seconds too. However, for paper books, I've mentioned the camera on Google Translate where you can literally just point it at the text that you want to know. Personally, I prefer the feel of paper books, but you do have to faff around with your phone. For Chinese learners, there's Pleco, which I prefer if you want to know more about an individual character. If you've chosen an electronic resource, then most operating systems are going to have a translate function these days, which is my preferred method to read an ebook if you can get it on PDF. Some books that aren't from a PDF won't do this, and it is really annoying. For articles and web pages more generally, there's IM Translator, which I'm using to do more intensive reading. It's basically a Chrome plugin that will translate web pages for you. Of course, there are paid options like Link, very popular. There's loads of content on there already, and you can import anything that you want to read, and it's got some audio on there. Sometimes it's text to speech, but that's life. As I say though, the key is to discard the use of translations once you understand the text. Otherwise, you're just reading in English, which sets you up nicely for the final step. So, this is something I always shied away from, first of all, with my journey in Spanish, and I would have been far more efficient if I prioritised it from the start, I am sure. But, to be honest, I'm a pretty relaxed person and I've really enjoyed my journey so far. Life is too short to worry about everything. So once you've got to the point where you've read a text and you've more or less understood it, we're not looking for perfection here, we're looking for progress. That is enough. But the brain can be cruel sometimes. That's to say, there is a good chance that not everything you've read is going to stick. Unless you've got some kind of weird super brain, it's inevitable you'll forget things. But given you've either worked out what something means by the mighty powers of your own deduction, or you've looked it up, either one is fine. Ideally, you don't want to be doing either of those things again if you can help it. So, there are some simple ways to avoid repeating that process again in the future. The most simple, just read it again at another time. I don't know why, but I really like this series of graded readers in Chinese, and I've read them multiple times. This one even fell off the roof of my car when I forgot that I left it there. I had to save it from the middle of the road and stick it back together. Anyway, you've already worked out what it means, more or less. Just reread it. That is partly why it's so important to get something that more or less interests you in step 1. Rereading is harder to do if you prefer novelty, but it's definitely another tool in your toolkit. Now, another option is for when you can get the audio for whatever you're reading. It is amazing that just listening to something every so often is so efficient at reminding you of the words that you've read. They're all in context too, so they're going to stick better than just say seeing a word list. I would listen to the audio for those books on my dog walks, and it was great. Now, I haven't done this next one with stories I've read, but some people absolutely love them. The dreaded flashcards. Pop words or phrases on physical cards or something like Anki, and it is more efficient than rereading the whole book again. Honestly, it's not for me. But I think the most important thing is find what appeals for you, and if that's your jam, then go for it. They help a lot of people. So something I'm doing at the minute is using notebooks. It is a bit random, I know, but a lot of the time I'm trying to be more analog than digital, and I just like the ritual of using one. I'm trying to get into the habit of taking a sling out with me so that I've always got a notebook in it. It's also mostly to try and practice my photography, but that's another story. Anyway, I've written down the summaries of some of the articles I've read so I can skim through them rather than just staring at my phone. And last but not least, and something I was doing a while back with the podcast Oyen El País, was talking to yourself and giving yourself a summary of what you've read. Now, You might need to refer back to the original text or notes if you've made any, but even the process of trying to recall those words, I found it was helpful at the time. The idea is trying to get into the habit of using the words rather than just being able to recognize them. Now, I don't know why, just the act of saying them out loud, but it really seems to help me when it comes to trying to use them again in a real conversation. And by having better vocabulary and grammar from reading, you'll be able to understand your conversation partner way more. So if reading to learn a language sounds good to you, then you can start by checking out the story learning sale I mentioned below. Now, the other problem is, what do you do after you've picked up all of this vocabulary? Well, in this video here, I've got some easy tips to take you to the next level and help you improve your speaking.